We'll tell you why the recent re-election of President Daniel Noboa means a diplomatic freeze between Mexico and Ecuador remains.
Al Jazeera. Vamos acompanhar agora como é a propaganda de uma televisão do Oriente Médio. Olha lá, as mulheres não usam burro o tempo todo, tá vendo? Palestina.
Opening up the conversation.
Representation matters. We haven't had the best representation of
A representação
Africans, so
importa.
for us it's about showing that positive representation for our kids.
With fresh perspectives from lesser-heard voices, the stream explores the key issues of our times on Al Jazeera.
Examining the headlines, Al Jazeera sets the stage, giving voice to the voiceless. Programs that open your eyes to an alternative view of the world today. On Al Jazeera.
As part of the colonial project, a statue of an Aboriginal Australian lady, stripped of her identity and displayed in a museum, portrayed a primitive people. But the stunning lady's great-granddaughter is reclaiming her ancestors' sculpture, rejecting outdated and offensive stereotypes, and exhibiting the piece with the courtesy and dignity she commanded. Her name is Nani Nelly, a witness documentary on Al Jazeera.
Interessante, né? Ele recebeu um documentário sobre as tribos da Oceania, ali, mais necessariamente da Austrália, onde eles tiram aquele estereótipo de que as tribos eram primitivas. Você pensa que em um lugar como esse só tem gente preconceituosa, mas não é bem assim não. São gente como a gente. Olha lá, nossa região nem aparece no mapa ali.
You're watching Al Jazeera. I'm Nastasia Tay here in Doha. Let's remind you of our top stories. At least 10 Palestinians, including children, have been killed after an Israeli attack on a tent camp in southern Gaza. Fires broke out in Khan Yunis after strikes destroyed.
Ele está dizendo que Israel atacou acampamento lá em Gaza.
A court in the US could hold the White House in contempt for ignoring a judge's order to halt deportation flights of migrants to El Salvador. A federal judge says the White
Prisioneiros
House's
chegaram
actions showed
a
deliberate
Salvador,
disregard for the
deportados
court's
dos
instructions.
Estados Unidos.
President Donald
Sabe o
Trump
que é mais
denies
de sei?
violating any
A maioria
order
desses
and has
deportados,
called the judge
maioria não,
radically
mas uma
reckless.
parte desses deportados não são salvadorenhos,
At least 60
são de
people
outros
have
países.
died and around 100 are still missing after a boat capsized in Democratic Republic of Congo on Tuesday. The wooden boat caught fire on the Congo River near the northwestern town of Mbandaka. Local officials say the
No
boat
Congo,
began
na
when
África,
someone was cooking on board.
Barco acabou
Well, US
afundando.
markets fell again on Wednesday as the head of the Federal Reserve
60 pessoas.
sounded a warning about the Trump administration's trade policies. The tech-heavy NASDAQ index slid 3%, while the Dow Jones dropped 1.7%. It comes as Federal Reserve Chair Jerome
a
Powell
Reserva
warned
Federal
that the Trump
quer
administration's
fazer uma
trade
guerra contra o
policies could
Trump.
raise inflation and slow growth.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger
Jerome
than
Powell.
anticipated, and the same is likely to be true
Esse é o
of the economic effects,
chefe
which
da
will
Reserva Federal.
include higher inflation and slower growth. Both survey and market-based measures of
Ou
near-term
seja, ele está
inflation
falando que vai ter
expectations have
inflação
moved up
alta e
significantly,
crescimento baixo.
with survey participants pointing to tariffs.
Well, let's bring in Stan Voiger. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a specialist on political economy and public finance. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. Stan, the markets and inflation are profoundly influenced by expectations. So can you explain for us what that means when tariffs exceed expectations?
Perguntou para ele o que vai significar essas taxas e tarifas.
In the future.
No Brasil, a gente está acostumado a ter taxa alta até há tempo já, não é de agora não.
They expect the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates, all else equal, and with that, they expect future stock market prices to be lower. That's the typical way in which it works.
But I recall just over 3 weeks ago, I think it was, Trump was saying that the Fed should cut interest rates to help transition to his tariffs. Couldn't that also increase inflation?
Well, that's precisely the conundrum the Fed finds itself in. The tariffs Trump has announced are so broad and amount to such a shock to the economy that we both see inflation expectations go up, and we'll likely see the price level go up. But at the same time, it's a big tax increase, and with that, a negative shock to growth. Now, as I said earlier, to offset inflation, the Fed would typically raise interest rates, but to offset that slower growth, the Fed would usually cut interest rates.
Isso pode não ser tão verdade assim, não, sabia? Se o governo, se a economia souber ser resiliente e olhar para dentro de si, ela consegue sim. Você sai muito bem sem a ajuda de outros países. Não mais só um país desenvolvido. Não fala um país subdesenvolvido como o Brasil, sabe? Como a Argentina. Que esses países não conseguem viver sozinhos. Mas os Estados Unidos da vida,
Well, I think the
Espanha,
uncertainty
talvez,
is quite
sabe?
bad, and I
Esses
assume we will
países que
start
se isolarem,
seeing
eles
the effect of
não
that
devem tão mal assim, não.
uncertainty in business investment in particular, but perhaps also in consumer spending. The administration certainly got cold feet. I mean, it's pretty remarkable that they announced their signature economic policy, went into effect on a Wednesday morning at midnight, and less than 15 hours later, they'd already undone a good chunk of it. A few days later, they undid another chunk of it when they announced that about a quarter of imports from China were now exempted. So yes, I think we can definitely say they got cold feet.
Agora sim, com essas medidas aí do Trump, né? Vai ter muito mercadoria chinesa.
You talked a lot there about consumer spending.
Infelizmente, para o Brasil, isso devia ter muita coisa, porque no Brasil, como a gente taxa tudo, essas mercadorias que poderiam ser despejadas aqui em valor muito baixo, o que ajudaria no acesso das pessoas à tecnologia mais fácil e barata. Não vai acontecer, porque nosso governo não é taxador. É até errado a gente falar do governo Trump, sendo que nosso governo é o governo que mais taxa no mundo.
No one is going to build a factory in America now if you don't know what trade policy will be like 2 days from now, let alone 2 years from now. So I don't think that's gonna help there. The other thing that's important to keep in mind when you talk about domestic manufacturing is that these tariffs impact a lot of intermediate inputs for American businesses. And so not only are American consumers hit directly by higher prices of consumer goods, American producers are also finding that inputs they rely on for domestic production are now will now be more expensive because of these tariffs.
Well, it is interesting times, interesting economic times indeed. Certainly, Stan Voiga there, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Interessante agora mesmo, viu? Tudo derretendo. Você do Brasil derretendo.
Well, Mexico's president is questioning the legitimacy of Ecuador's recent presidential election. Claudia Sheinbaum also dismissed renewing diplomatic ties with Quito as long as Daniel Noboa is president. John Holman has the details for us from Mexico City.
Pero no fue justa la contienda.
One person who's not happy about President Daniel Noboa's recent re-election in Ecuador. Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's leader.
Nosotros, para empezar, no tenemos relaciones con Ecuador.
We don't have relations with Ecuador, and we're not going to have relations with Ecuador while Noboa is president, because he was responsible for the invasion of the embassy, for the attack on our sovereignty.
She's talking about when Ecuadorian security forces stormed the Mexican embassy in Quito a year ago, hauling out an Ecuadorian ex-vice president who Mexico had granted asylum. But Sheinbaum went further.
What's more, his election victory was very doubtful, and the other candidate is saying there was fraud.
That candidate was leftist Luisa Gonzalez. She asked for a recount but presented no evidence to back her claims. Gustavo Petro, president of Colombia, also refused to recognize the results of Ecuador's vote last Sunday. But the European Union mission for the elections completely rejected the claims.
I'll say, ill-intentioned people who have invested great effort in creating uncertainty among the population, sowing distrust in electoral institutions, and promoting a narrative of massive and systemic fraud, which we categorically reject.
The Organization of American States said the same. Noboa won. What's notable is that Sheinbaum and Petro would both describe themselves as from the left, while Noboa is from the right. So there seems some clear ideological divisions here. And Sheinbaum has voiced no such concerns about, for example, the ongoing presidency of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, despite his government being widely condemned as autocratic and illegitimate. But trade from Mexico to Ecuador makes up less than 1% of the country's exports. This is a fight that both presidents can afford to have.
Assim como no Brasil, o mundo também está passando por mudanças constantes. E infelizmente é sobre isso. Vamos ficando por aqui com a presença da minha filhotinha, que veio se despedir, então boa noite. Senhora de criança está dormindo já. Tchau, tchau. Dorme bem, minha filha. E é isso por hoje. É só.